Out of Africa wasn't just another sweeping Hollywood romance. It was a brutal clash of egos, a logistical nightmare in the Kenyan wilds, and a production that nearly collapsed under its own weight. What looked like effortless beauty on screen was built on storms, accidents, and endless fights behind the camera. From near-death stunts to actors at war with the environment, the making of this film was as dramatic as anything in the story of Karen Blixen herself. So let's dive into 20 weird facts about Out of Africa, the chaos, the heartbreak, the secrets Hollywood tried to smooth over. And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a detail so shocking it could change how you see the film forever. Stay with me. Let's begin. 1. Meryl Streep wasn't wanted for the role. When Universal Studios began casting, Meryl Streep wasn't first choice to play Karen Blixen. Executives dismissed her as too ugly for the role, a brutal judgment considering her already acclaimed talent. The studio lobbied for someone more conventionally glamorous, even eyeing Jane Seymour. Sydney Pollack, however, fought hard, believing Streep's piercing intelligence matched Blixen's strength. Streep herself reportedly said she slid into the role only after proving her ability to disappear into the Danish accent. Not beauty, but authenticity won her the part. Ironically, her performance became one of the defining portrayals of her career, silencing those early critics. On screen, she radiates dignity, but behind the scenes, she was still fighting Hollywood's obsession with looks over skill. It's a reminder. This wasn't just casting, it was war over what counted as star power. 2. Robert Redford refused to do a British accent. Dennis Finch Hatton, the real-life figure Redford portrayed, was British to the core, but Robert Redford flatly refused to adopt the accent. Sydney Pollack begged, but Redford believed audiences wouldn't accept him with a posh English voice. "People pay to hear my voice," he argued. So, the film presented a jarring detail, an English aristocrat who sounded thoroughly American. The compromise? Redford softened his delivery and focused on body language to capture Dennis's spirit. Critics at the time slammed the decision as lazy, but Pollack later admitted the gamble worked commercially. It wasn't historical truth, it was cinematic compromise. What audiences didn't know was how heated this debate became. At one point, Redford nearly walked. Not a question of dialect, but of ego. This battle revealed how much Hollywood bent reality for box office appeal. 3. The crew battled deadly wildlife. The idyllic savannah shots came at a cost. Danger lurked everywhere. Cast and crew worked in locations swarming with snakes, scorpions, and even lions. Karen Blixen's farmhouse, where key scenes were filmed, was infested with poisonous black mambas. Animal handlers had to sweep the set each morning to keep the crew safe. Meryl Streep later admitted she lived in fear of being bitten during night shoots. One local guide warned that simply stepping in the wrong patch of grass could be fatal. Filming wasn't just a challenge of artistry, it was survival. Unlike the controlled chaos of Hollywood soundstages, Africa itself dictated the pace. The landscapes may look serene on camera, but behind those sweeping shots there was constant tension. Would today be the day the wilderness fought back? It wasn't just location shooting. It was Russian roulette with nature. 4. The dangerous plane scene was real. One of the film's most iconic sequences features Redford flying Streep over the savannah in a biplane. Audiences assumed it was safe movie magic. It wasn't. The plane was a real de Havilland gypsy moth, fragile and unpredictable in turbulent winds. Streep, terrified of flying, had to actually sit in the cockpit as the plane dipped over cliffs and rivers. Sydney Pollack insisted on authenticity, even as safety experts warned against it. Redford, an experienced pilot, did much of the flying himself, sometimes without informing the studio insurance team. At one point, a sudden gust nearly stalled the plane midair, leaving both stars shaken. The scene looks like poetry, but in reality, it flirted with disaster. Not simulated danger, actual peril. And it's chilling to realize a single mistake could have ended both their lives on film. 5. The elephant charge that went wrong. During one safari sequence, handlers brought elephants onto set, but African elephants aren't predictable circus animals. They're wild, massive, and volatile. At one point, a bull elephant unexpectedly charged toward the camera crew. Panic erupted. Cameramen scattered, equipment was abandoned, and Meryl Streep was rushed into a jeep for safety. Sydney Pollack reportedly yelled, "Keep rolling," even as chaos unfolded. The elephant stopped short, but the fear was real and stayed with the cast. Later, Streep joked that the animals were better actors than humans, but privately admitted she'd never felt so vulnerable. Watching the film today, you see calm, majestic wildlife in the background. What you don't see are the moments where those same animals nearly derailed the production entirely. It wasn't staged terror. It was survival, captured on the margins of Hollywood romance. 6. The crew was constantly sick. Filming in Kenya wasn't just about battling animals, it was a war against disease. Dysentery, malaria, and food poisoning swept through the crew like wildfire. Catered meals were often contaminated, and water wasn't always safe to drink. Meryl Streep herself reportedly fell ill multiple times, but pushed through without halting production. Sydney Pollack later admitted he lost weeks of usable footage because key crew members were bedridden. One assistant director recalled, "There wasn't a single day we didn't lose someone to sickness." The glamorous African vistas masked a set that felt more like a field hospital. In Hollywood, a flu outbreak might delay a schedule. In Africa, disease threatened to sink the entire production. It wasn't just acting endurance. It was survival through sheer grit and constant medical intervention. What audiences saw as sweeping romance was built on misery. 7. Karen Blixen's house was almost unusable. The production shot key sequences inside Blixen's original farmhouse in Nairobi. But by 1985, the house was in disrepair. Walls were crumbling, the plumbing barely worked, and wild animals frequently roamed the grounds. Pollack's team had to restore parts of the building just enough for cameras to roll while still preserving the authentic look. During one take, a section of ceiling collapsed mid-scene, narrowly missing crew. Streep later described the location as both inspiring and terrifying. Authentic, but unsafe. For continuity, the crew mixed actual farmhouse interiors with soundstage recreations. To the audience, it looked seamless. In truth, it was patchwork. Not museum-perfect history, but dangerous improvisation. What viewers didn't realize, every scene filmed inside that house carried the risk of real collapse. The beauty of authenticity was built on the edge of ruin. 8. Redford and Streep had clashing styles. On screen, Robert Redford and Meryl Streep radiated chemistry. Off-screen, sparks flew for different reasons. Streep approached every scene with rigorous preparation, dissecting dialogue and rehearsing accents. Redford, a naturalistic actor, preferred spontaneity, often resisting heavy rehearsal. This difference led to frequent tension. Streep would push for another take to refine her delivery. Redford would argue that too much repetition killed authenticity. Sydney Pollack spent hours mediating between them. One crew member quipped it was like oil and water, and Pollack was the funnel keeping them in the same bottle. Ironically, that friction created an electric on-screen dynamic, Streep's precision against Redford's ease. What looks like effortless intimacy in the hair-washing scene was, in reality, the product of constant creative clashes. Not harmony, but conflict forged the love story audiences adored. 9. The hair-washing scene. Almost didn't happen. One of the most sensual moments in the film is Dennis washing Karen's hair by the river, but Sydney Pollack almost cut it. He worried the scene slowed the narrative and felt too quiet for audiences. Streep fought fiercely to keep it, believing it captured the essence of Karen's vulnerability. Redford, too, supported the scene, calling it the closest thing to intimacy without dialogue. Cinematographer David Watkin used natural light and long takes, creating an almost painterly effect. Pollack relented, but only after heated debate. Today, the scene is iconic, often cited as one of the most romantic in cinema history. What audiences don't realize is how close it came to vanishing altogether. Not a guaranteed classic, but a near-deleted moment that now defines the film's legacy. 10. The cinematographer hated the sun. David Watkin, the film's cinematographer, was notoriously eccentric. He disliked shooting under direct sunlight, calling it flat and lifeless. But filming in Kenya meant brutal, blinding daylight almost every hour. Watkin devised strange solutions, including massive white sheets stretched across trees to diffuse light. At one point, he refused to shoot until clouds rolled in, forcing hours-long delays. The crew mocked his stubbornness, but the results were undeniable. The film's luminous glow earned him an Academy Award. Half genius, half maddening perfectionist, Watkin turned impossible African light into cinematic poetry. The irony? The movie looks drenched in golden sunlight, yet behind the camera it was a constant battle to chase shadows. Not natural beauty, but engineered brilliance. And if you're still with me, go ahead and like and subscribe, because the next 10 facts take us even deeper, into deaths, disasters, and secrets hidden from audiences for decades. 11. The lion attack. That almost happened. The lions in Out of Africa weren't animatronics or composites. They were real. Trainers assured the cast that the big cats were calm, but Meryl Streep learned quickly that calm is relative. During one tense scene, a lion unexpectedly roared and lunged closer than planned. Streep froze, her fear so genuine it remained on film. Robert Redford grabbed her arm instinctively, even though that wasn't scripted. Handlers rushed in, but Pollack kept rolling, knowing he'd captured something raw. Later, Streep admitted the terror you see in her eyes wasn't acting. It was survival. Audiences swoon over the majesty of lions in the movie, but the reality was terrifyingly thin safety margins. Not controlled Hollywood spectacle, but wild unpredictability. The line between art and disaster was razor-sharp, and this time the cast barely escaped unharmed. 12. The record-breaking budget. Out of Africa wasn't a modest prestige drama, it was one of the most expensive productions of the 1980s. With costs ballooning past $28 million, Universal executives panicked as delays, illnesses, and weather shutdowns drained resources. Sydney Pollack fought for every dollar, insisting the authentic African shoot justified the expense. Studio accountants disagreed, threatening to pull the plug. At one point, the insurance company considered classifying the film as a catastrophic risk. Yet Pollack's gamble paid off. The film grossed over $227 million worldwide and swept the Academy Awards. To audiences, it looked like old-fashioned Hollywood grandeur. Behind the scenes, it was a financial cliffhanger, teetering between ruin and triumph. Not safe budgeting, but reckless ambition turned into cinematic gold. 13. Meryl Streep's accent. Almost failed. Karen Blixen's Danish accent was crucial to the role, but Streep's choice raised eyebrows. Rather than push for a caricatured sound, she modeled her voice after real Danish speakers, softening it for audiences. Critics praised her restraint, but during test screenings, some executives complained they couldn't understand her fully. Pollack worried viewers would be alienated. Streep refused to adjust, insisting that the slight difficulty forced audiences to lean in and pay attention. It was a risky gamble. In fact, Universal briefly considered dubbing over her voice, until Pollack shut it down. What could have been an embarrassing mismatch became one of Streep's most lauded performances. Not compromise, but defiance. And the result? An accent so subtle that it lingers like a shadow, shaping the film's authenticity without overwhelming it. 14. Sydney Pollack almost directed himself. Before casting Robert Redford as Dennis, Sydney Pollack flirted with the idea of playing the role himself. Pollack had acting experience and was fascinated by the character. But when he quietly tested the idea with producers, they balked. Universal wanted a bankable star, not a director-actor experiment. Pollack admitted years later, "I probably would have ruined the movie." Still, his presence loomed large. He shadowed Redford constantly, giving intense direction about posture, tone, and pacing. Crew members joked Redford had two characters to play, Dennis and Pollack's vision of Dennis. What audiences didn't realize is how much of Dennis Finch Hatton wasn't Redford at all, but Pollack's fantasy projected through him, not just direction, but possession. A strange creative haunting ran through every frame. 15. A snake. In the bedroom. One night during filming, Meryl Streep returned to her Nairobi lodging only to find a massive python coiled under her bed. Local staff rushed to remove it, but Streep was shaken for days. Crew members began joking about Meryl's method acting, since Blixen herself wrote about deadly snakes in Africa. But the truth was chilling. Snakes frequently invaded tents and hotel rooms, forcing constant vigilance. Even Redford reportedly kept a machete nearby at night. Audiences swoon over the film's romance, but behind the camera, terror often waited in the shadows. Not stage fright, but primal fear. Every actor's sleep was haunted by the possibility of finding fangs inches away. The glamorous colonial setting was, in reality, survival under siege from Africa's untamed wildlife. 16. The weather destroyed entire sets. Kenya's climate was as unforgiving as its wildlife. Sudden torrential rains turned shooting locations into swamps overnight. Elaborate outdoor sets, carefully built farmhouses, fences, and props were swept away or warped beyond use. One storm delayed production for over a week, costing Universal hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sydney Pollack admitted that he sometimes had to rebuild scenes from scratch because nothing matched the previous day's continuity. The crew nicknamed the downpours Pollack's Curse. What audiences see as lush, romantic rainstorms were, in truth, catastrophic interruptions. Each frame of cinematic beauty came at the cost of massive cleanup, endless reshoots, and the constant fear that the African sky would tear down their work again. Not predictable weather delays. Brutal, uncontrollable sabotage from nature itself. 17. Karen Blixen's family. Objected. When word spread that Hollywood was adapting Blixen's memoir, her surviving relatives were outraged. They accused the film of romanticizing colonial life and misrepresenting Karen's struggles. Some even tried to block filming at certain locations connected to Blixen. Universal downplayed the controversy, but Pollack acknowledged the tension. He defended the film as a portrait, not a history lesson. Critics later echoed the family's concerns, calling the movie a nostalgic fantasy of colonial Africa. What audiences didn't know is how close the film came to sparking an international scandal. Not a universally embraced tribute, but a contested legacy. The glossy romance hid deeper cultural wounds, reminding us that Out of Africa wasn't just about love. It was about who controls history's narrative. 18. The sound department was driven mad. Recording dialogue on location in Kenya was a nightmare. The savannah was alive with buzzing insects, distant animal calls, and unpredictable winds. The sound team often had to redo entire sequences in automated dialogue replacement back in Hollywood, lip-syncing Streep and Redford's lines. One sound engineer described it as trying to catch whispers in a hurricane. Streep, known for her precision, grew frustrated when her carefully modulated accent didn't carry in outdoor takes. Redford, meanwhile, disliked looping dialogue, calling it phony. Tensions mounted, but without post-production fixes, the movie would have been unintelligible. The irony? The film won an Academy Award for Best Sound. Not natural clarity, painstaking reconstruction. What audiences hear as seamless is actually a patchwork quilt of salvaged recordings and studio trickery. 19. The makeup team battled dust. The African landscape was breathtaking, but it wreaked havoc on costumes and makeup. Fine red dust coated everything: faces, fabrics, even camera lenses. The makeup team had to wipe down Streep's skin between every take, while wardrobe assistants kept re-dyeing clothes that faded under the brutal sun. Continuity became nearly impossible. One shot might show pristine fabric, the next covered in grit. Crew members joked the dust should have received its own screen credit. For Meryl Streep, who had to embody Blixen's elegance, it was exhausting. "You could never feel clean," she later admitted. Yet the visual effect was stunning. The characters looked authentically weathered by Africa. Not controlled costuming, but constant battle. The beauty of realism was forged in dust, sweat, and endless reapplication. 20. The movie nearly lost its ending. The final scene, where Karen leaves Africa after Dennis's death, almost collapsed under studio interference. Universal executives wanted a happier resolution, pushing Pollack to soften the ending with voiceover reassurance. Pollack resisted, insisting the heartbreak was essential to the story. He clashed with producers so fiercely that post-production nearly stalled. Only after test audiences responded with tears did Universal back down. The ending, bleak but beautiful, became one of the film's most enduring moments. Without Pollack's stubbornness, the movie might have ended with sentimentality instead of truth. Not compromise, but defiance preserved its power. That last shot of the Ngong Hills wasn't just cinematic closure, it was a battle won against Hollywood's fear of sadness. Bonus fact, Meryl Streep's life was put at risk in silence. The most shocking secret? During one campfire night shoot, a lion broke free from its handler and prowled within feet of Meryl Streep. The crew froze, lights stayed on, and no one dared to shout for fear of provoking the animal. Streep remained absolutely still, her terror hidden from the camera. After long, tense minutes, the lion was recaptured. Universal buried the incident to avoid scandal, but insiders later revealed how close the film came to tragedy. What audiences saw as serene campfire storytelling was, in reality, a brush with death, not dramatization, actual mortal danger. Out of Africa swept the 1986 Academy Awards, winning 7 Oscars, including Best Picture. But behind its golden glow lay sickness, storms, clashing egos, and constant brushes with danger. It wasn't just a romance on screen, it was survival off it. And maybe that's why the film still resonates, because every frame carries the weight of real struggle. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden truths, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, sometimes the greatest love stories aren't written in the script. They're carved into the chaos of filmmaking itself.